afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you had a great lunch break. We are now starting our afternoon session with an interview with EASA. Unfortunately, Mr. Tidga had other commitments last minute, so he could not join us. But we are joined by Mr. Jean-Marc Cluzeau, who is going to discuss with Robert resilience from EASA's perspective. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, it's Robert Baltus. I'm just trying to start my camera. Okay, good afternoon. And first of all, I hope you had a good lunch break, and I hope you look forward to another number of good sessions this afternoon. As you know, the name of this session, Resilience, Human and Business, was put into practice by a phone call I got just about 10 minutes ago by Luc Tidgat, the strategy director of the EASA. The glass half full is, half empty is that he can't make it. The glass half full is the fact that he can't make it because he will be, or he's currently talking to the European Commission on the testing regime. Now, to put it in perspective, if we want to get back to flying, the most important thing we need to get sorted is the testing regime. So if any excuse would have been good, this is the best one, and it's much appreciated that we have Jean-Marc Cluzeau as the replacement. The good thing about Jean-Marc is that he should be able to help us and give us guidance on the same questions that we wanted to put forward for Luc. So with that, welcome Jean-Marc, and thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I had a good laugh when I saw the slide in front of my eyes because the title is "How do we prepare for the unexpected?" and that's exactly what's happening to me at this very moment. But it is true that Luc at the last moment had this very important meeting with the Commission. So I'm happy to take over from him at the last moment. I must say that we've learned to deal with short-term actions or reactions. So I think I'm prepared to respond to your questions as much as I can.
Excellent. Well, let's start with a question that I've asked a lot of people already in the last few weeks and months. But how was your organization affected by the pandemic, and how did you manage to continue the operation of EASA?
Our organization was affected, I think, like many organizations in many layers. Dramatic shift in terms of priorities. Unavailability of staff locally, being most of them at home teleworking, giving responses to demands from our key partners, from the Commission, from the stakeholders, from the member states, from the industry. So we were from one day to another deeply into a crisis management mode. I must say that we are very lucky in the agency to have a very broad array of expertise in our staff members, and for that reason we could set up very rapidly a crisis management team with the appropriate expertise. We have 2 doctors in our team. We put HR experts, communication experts, policy officers dealing with the technical matters, and with this small team, we managed to monitor the crisis, to take actions very rapidly. And I must say this team was very efficient, and on a daily basis they worked on the crisis management, informing colleagues on a daily basis, and this allowed us, I think, to continue operation in a very effective manner. I would not say in a seamless way, but almost.
Oh, sorry, I just muted myself. How easy was it to work for an organization like EASA? And if you look at that, what was the biggest pain point if you look at working from home for such a diverse and international organization?
I think what surprised all of us is our ability to do our work, I would say, almost normally while teleworking. So that was, I would say, the big positive point. The adaptation was very quick. And of course, with there are some drawbacks, and the fact that there is no physical contact anymore between colleagues in the long term creates also problems with possibly the tendency of some staff members to be a bit isolated. But I would say that yes, this was the main positive element. I think was our capacity to adapt. We had a few, I would say, a few days of difficulty from a logistic point of view, because like many organizations, our system were not adapted to have 100% of the staff teleworking. So we had some VPN problems, but many people faced this problem, but we could solve within days these problems and work very efficiently with virtually 100% of the staff in teleworking.
Now, I can imagine well, while all this is happening, you start to get phone calls, and so from an operator perspective, what was the biggest issue that operators were looking for from EASA? Did you have operators on the phone directly or through NAAs? But what did the operators want?
Well, in fact, we had many contacts directly from operators, because you know, we are an organization that is extremely connected to its stakeholders. So from the beginning, we had contact from operators or from associations representing the operators. And of course, what the operators needed is an interlocutor at European level who could give them some advice and provide solutions to their immediate problems. For instance, speaking of airline business, the fact that suddenly access to simulators was not possible anymore meant that we had to find a short-term solution to keep the currency of pilot licenses valid. So we have to find a way to define exemptions. And as soon as you have to define exemptions, of course, you have to find the right mitigating measures to ensure that the level of safety is the same. And that's an example of a response that needs to be provided at European level. And we did, of course, our best through the return to normal operation plan that we built to provide this kind of answer to the operators.
Well, I think from the return to normal operations from the EBAA side, we were really impressed with all the work in there, and also the short lines and communication. So just a big compliment on that side. If you look at from a national authorities perspective, because at the end of the day, you have more or less two customers. You have the final customers, which are the operators, but in between, you have to deal with the national authorities. Did they also, were they looking for specific things, or was it in line with what the operators wanted?
Yes, in fact, I would say it was. We had parallel discussions, of course, with the national aviation authorities. We have also a constant relationship with the national aviation authorities. What we realized through the crisis is that in many countries, the aviation authorities do not have the mandate to tackle health and safety issues. So and the health and safety authorities themselves, they were not used at dealing with aviation risks. And through the contact that we had with the member states, we could, I would say, build the missing link between aviation safety issues and health and safety issues. And that's the reason why there was also a big demand from the member states. And also, I think that through our collaboration at European level with ECDT, we managed to bridge the gap that was missing at national levels in many countries.
And that's actually also a message we've been telling our members as well, that we have here the most integrated European business or industry, which is aviation. And then we see health, which is still a national competence. And the fact that we have the EASA ECDC document makes it really useful. Still not there yet. And as I said at the beginning, I'm very pleased to hear that that Luc couldn't make it for the right reason, which is we need this testing. That's the most important missing link. If we have a common standardized approach to testing, that would help the industry tremendously. So if we look back and now more from a risk perspective, was there anything that was overlooked? I mean, a lot of things happened in a very short time frame. The RNO document came out really quick, and I like the footnote in it, which was basically saying, please appreciate we've done it so quickly. If there's anything, we're going to amend it later. Obviously not in those words, but I thought that was a really good approach by speeding up necessary changes in interpretation of regulations. But from a risk perspective, are there any things that you, looking back now, can say, hey, we missed something, or we shouldn't have done that, or we should have done that?
Frankly, I don't think we would have overlooked anything. You know, I mean, risk risk management is a very dynamic activity, and I think that we are lucky enough, I think, in Europe to have quite a dynamic system to manage risk. We have a collaborative approach with the stakeholders to discuss risks. So we have, I would say, a system in place which is already quite agile in terms of risk management, and we could make use of it. And so part of the work that we did since the beginning of the crisis is to work on the risk identifications and ensure that the SMS of the operator can tackle those risks. And I think that the introduction of SMS a few years ago, which I think was quite debated at first when it was introduced, I think that a crisis like this one really shows its added value, because safety management system is about a system, but it's also about a safety culture. It's about all the personnel of an organization understanding that managing risks is not something that is given forever, that every day people have to think, is there a new risk in my business? Shall I report about that risk? Are there any mitigating measures? And I think that it's all the work that has been done in the past years in the implementation of SMS. And here, I mean, I have to, I fully appreciate the great work done by EBAA in terms of safety management implementation. I think the work that you've done is absolutely great. I think that this is something which makes us quite confident that we normally do not have overlooked any key risk during the crisis.
So if we look at the workload, we already had obviously the 737 MAX and recertification, which is a big thing. We have Brexit on the horizon, which also means a financial issue for EASA to an extent, because we lose their funding. And then we get COVID. So with all these additional tasks and you're on a tight budget, how did you juggle resources? Are there changes? How did you prioritize in it?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think you mentioned a few events, which of course led us to adjust our planning and our organization. We have a few tools to plan our resources. Fortunately, in our organization, one of them being EPPSI, European Plan for Aviation Safety, where we define the priorities and the tasks to be conducted in terms of safety. We are going to publish the new version of EPPSI beginning of next year, and then you will see that there will be a number of priorities being reshuffled. When we have in crisis time the need of expert resource to deal with short-term issues that we have absolutely to do because it has a high degree of safety impact. There are other tasks which have a lower immediate safety impact that we postpone, and typically this concerns a number of rulemaking activities. And we are fully aware that there are a number of rulemaking activities which are also needed from the stakeholders, because not only they have to do with the safety, but they have to do also sometimes with the efficiency of their business, or even with their capacity to conduct business. And those tasks, some of them have been postponed because the resources have been put on other priorities. So that's, I would say, the main consequence on our activity is that one, that there will be some regulatory activities that will be postponed.
Yeah. Now, if you're part of an agency which has safety as part of their name, you have a huge safety perspective. What are in your view, the three biggest risk operators need to think about in this COVID, EASA, or COVID and safety timeframe?
I think the first risk, of course, is the sudden change in the activity, in the environment, in the priority of the organization. So the risk linked to this is that not working in a normal environment, we miss the emergence of some risk that we are not able to manage. So the first risk for me is the sudden change, the disruption in the activities that may create some risks that are not properly identified. The second risk for me is related to people. A crisis like the one we are living at the moment puts a lot of pressure on people at work, in their family life, in their daily environment. We know from psychological reports that there are an increasing number of psychological problems of all sorts with the population at the moment, and this can have an impact on the work. And I think that it's very important for the employers to be very vigilant, and this is something that we do also at the agency. Our line management is very much committed to being close to their staff members to ensure that their well-being. So that's the second key risk for me. People well-being, it's a very important aspect. And I think that the third risk is linked, I think, to the first one. It means that if you focus too much on the new risks that you have to deal with during the crisis, then you forget, I would say, the bread and butter activity in terms of risk management, and you fail to continue managing the current risks. So this would be in the nutshell what I would say about the three main risks for organizations.
Now, as EASA, you also have an excellent view of the indicators of how the industry is performing, or at the moment not performing by not flying as much. But if we look from a data perspective, are there already indicators showing that certain aviation activities might have become more dangerous? Is there anything you could find in the data files on that?
No, at this stage we don't have such data, but the question is interesting because it shows that we need also to dig into the data differently, and possibly to collect data that we don't have at the moment. Because in the end, I mean, you assess only the data that you have, and the first thing is to collect the right data. It is clear that there are activities, for instance, activities related to the storage and de-storage of aircraft. I think that so far we've had little data about that because it was a marginal activity. It has become, I would say, in terms of aircraft maintenance, a key activity in the past few months, and we need clearly to monitor the data on this activity to see if there is any emergent risk related to this. But so far, we don't have any concrete indicator that would tell us, oh, there is a clear emerging risk in this or that domain.
Well, we're already at 2 o'clock, but I've got 2 questions I would like to finish with, and then I have one question from the audience I would like to share with you. But The R&O work of EASA was also industry-led. I thought it was fast regulations that were created in partnership with industry. I think the MAB and the SAB structure were much better used, and things were going much quicker. Is this a template for the future? Is it a good time to see, can we look at a different way to get regulations and changes, fundamental changes even sometimes, move quicker?
Yes, I think that through any crisis, you have to learn some lessons. I think that the R&O work, I would not say it was industry-led. I think it was industry-focused, more precisely. And I think that we've learned many things during this crisis. In particular, how to work quickly to respond to quick demand, how to work better with digital tools. And we are also already starting to discuss with the stakeholders how to learn from those lessons, to work better, quickly, in a more focused manner. For instance, one example, and that's not only linked to the R&O process, but it is linked to the use of digital tools. It's much easier with digital tools to have focus meeting of 2 hours with stakeholders on one topic. While in the past, our meeting with stakeholders were 2 or 3 day meetings with lots of topics and with not necessarily all the experts for the specific topics. So with a better use of digital tools, with more focused work on certain specific issues, I'm sure that we can work in the future much quicker and also achieving much better results.
And then just for the audience, this is a very topical discussion that's going on between EASA and the member states and the strategic board. So they're looking at how can we fine tune and get better feedback structure in place, etc. So that's definitely that warrants a session on its own, I think, Jean-Marc.
Yes, or a whole conference maybe.
Now, the last question is, do you hear already anything from the room next door or 2 doors down on this protocol? Because it is, I think, the most important thing, a testing protocol. I started this discussion with it, and I'll say it again. Anything you guys are doing, I think it's great, because this is the most important thing. So the sooner you can tell our members that, yes, we've sorted it, I think we all would be very happy with that. So that's not so much a question as a statement.
Okay, so I take the statement and I will forward it immediately to Luc Tidgat. But I think that you see, I mean, Luc Tidgat has been instrumental in this work, and he's fully committed to that. I think it's his baby, and I think that I'm quite sure that we'll have a very positive outcome. But we're happy to communicate the outcome to you very soon.
Yes, no, it's the way forward. So I have one question before I would like to close it, which is it's a technical question, so I'm not sure if you're the right person for it, but Paulo Pastana from NetJets was asking whether the ACARS community portal is being phased out in January 2021. Will there be a replacement? Like I said, it's a technical question, so if you don't know the answer.
No, I think that for these detailed questions, I will ask the colleague and provide you with the answer after the session, because I'm not sure I have the precise answer to this question. I'm sorry about that.
Great. Well, with that, I would like to thank you, Jean-Marc, for standing in, and answer-wise, perfect. Thank you very much for that. The EBA is very pleased that you were able to make yourselves available for our virtual safety summit. And it's the goal of the EBA to ensure that EASA understands our business aviation industry, but also our industry understands EASA. And I've always been a great advocate of the work done by the current EASA team, and I hope we can continue to work on this to continue for a safe and sustainable business aviation industry going forward. So, Jean-Marc, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your invitation. It was my pleasure to be with you. And just if I could add a couple of words, I think that cooperation with EBAA, I think it's a for me, it's a model of stakeholders cooperation. So let's continue on that basis.
Pleased to hear that. And on that note, back to you, Corina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Now we are moving on to our afternoon panel session. The topic is going to be past, present, and future regulatory changes, and we're going to discuss peer support programs and alcohol and drugs. The panel will be steered by Johan, and the members of the panel will be Aedrian Bekker, aviation psychologist from Center for Aviation Psychology, Dave Fielding, BALPA captain on an A380 who's representing EPPSI, Julia Egerer, she's the aerodrome sections manager at EASA, and Jeroen Jansen, senior expert air operations at EASA. Now, Aedrian, he works as a clinical and organizational aviation psychologist and is the co-founder of the Center for Aviation Psychology. He started out as a clinician with the UK NHS, and he has worked in aviation and aerospace for the past 20 years. In this time, he's built expertise in both consulting and project delivery of behavior interventions at enterprise level across the globe. More recently, he has developed a program specifically tailored for business and rotary wing operators, recognizing it as an underserved sector of the industry. Dave, he has studied classics at Cambridge before making the perfect logical step and becoming an airline pilot. He joined British Airways in 1993 on the Highlands and Islands division, and he was flying the BAE ATP, which taught him a love for Scotland and a hate for aircraft, which kept breaking down and have no cockpit heaters. They achieved his command on the Airbus A320 in 2001 with the perfect timing the day before 9/11. Since then, he has been a captain on the Boeing 767, Boeing 777, and the A380, which is his current type. He has also been a union representative since 1996 and has been interested in alcohol and welfare cases, which in turn led to him creating a BALPA peer intervention program. The German wings crash of 2015 changed the game dramatically, and he worked with British Airways to adapt and improve the program. In January 2017, the Pilots Assistant Network became the first peer support program in Europe to be launched post-German wings, and right now most of the UK airlines have or are planning on implementing the BALPA British Airways program in some form. Dave also sits on the executive board of the EPPSI, which stands for the European Pilot Peer Support Initiative, and this has drawn together all the European experts in setting up peer support programs. Julia Egerer, prior to joining EASA in 2010, Julia worked as an aviation insurance underwriter, insuring commercial airlines and assessing airline safety performance as a general manager for the Association of European Airlines in Brussels, representing the interests of Europe's airlines vis-à-vis European institutions, with a focus on airport infrastructure, passenger facilitation, ground handling, and flight time limitations. Upon joining EASA, she was responsible for stakeholder management, working with the European Commission and in particular with the EASA committees, European member states and industry representatives, and as a senior expert in air operations. Jeroen, at the age of 14, he made his first solo flight as a glider pilot while he was studying to become an aviation maintenance engineer. During his career in maintenance organizations, he acquired his CPL and started flying commercially. These flying activities were mainly in aerial work and contracted training and selection activities for the Dutch Air Force. In 2002, he joined the Dutch CAA as an inspector for ramp inspections and historical aviation. In 2005, he became the Dutch National Coordinator for Ramp Inspection Program. As such, he was a member of the Steering Committee for Ramp Inspection Program, which was coordinated by the Joint Aviation Authorities at that time. Since 2007, the coordination of the program was assigned to European Aviation Safety Agency, and he joined the EASA in 2007 as a ramp inspection coordinator, where he has been working in this domain as a manager and currently as the senior coordinator. Johan, you have the control. Johan?
Thank you. Yes, my video was just turned on. My controls then, Corina, thank you very much for that introduction to this afternoon session, and also welcome everyone who is attending. As Corina mentioned, we will have two topics this afternoon, and both are selected by our safety committee. Peer support or support programs, and alcohol testing in connection with ramp checks. And this has been, especially peer support and ramp checks, has been a almost standing topic during the since 2018 in our physical safety summits. And so I can expect a bit of Q&A, and I see that we have already run over a bit. This session is scheduled for 1 hour, but we can run over depending on questions and so on. So please use the Q&A tool. As you probably all know, we will start off with peer support, and peer support has been pushed forward, the implementation date by 6 months. So now we, as commercial operator, should have it in place by Valentine in February next year. And before I hand over to Julia, that will start this session with a bit of background on why and how EASA has developed this quite unique regulation, unique in a sense that it's not technical and it's more soft. I would like to ask you, the attendees, a poll on how far have you come in your implementation, and then we'll look at that when all the panelists have a chance to give their short presentation or background. So Julia, you have, apart from what Corina said, also been heavily involved in the whole development of the support program regulation. Can you give us some background on how the development was and why it came to be? And I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yes, I have to get used to Zoom, apologies. So I see that everybody can see me, so good afternoon, welcome everybody, and thank you to EBAA for giving us this opportunity to talk you through what we have done on support programs. And I say support programs, not peer support programs, for a specific reason, and I'm going to give you the answer in the next couple of minutes. So why has EASA actually embarked on looking into support programs at all? And like my mother, who always tells me she remembers where she was when JF Kennedy died, and I remember where I was on 9/11, I also remember very well where I was when the German wings crash happened. That was in March 2015. I was actually in a meeting with regulators from all over Europe. And one of them said, hang on a second, I just looked at my computer and there's something horrible happening, and an aircraft crashed. So this accident on the 24th of March 2015 is actually the trigger for why EASA, this Germanwings accident, is actually the trigger for why EASA has looked into mitigating measures, so that something like this would never, hopefully, happen again. And support programs is just one building block out of 4 building blocks that we have looked into. So building blocks, i.e. support mitigating measures that we have looked into to make sure that we have the proper tools in place to prevent such an accident from happening again. We consider that support programs are very effective, cost efficient, and they probably out of the whole package that we proposed at the time when it was just a proposal, were one of the most efficient and cost-efficient safety mitigating measures. And when we were looking into all the packages of mitigating measures that we tried to develop after the Germanwings accident, we specifically looked into support programs, and we realized that not only is it efficient and cost effective, but it is a very important part of destigmatizing mental health issues. And there is a very strong support from all the stakeholders that were involved in our rulemaking tasks. You know, at EASA, we never build rulemakings on our own. We always consult with industry, with trade unions, with member states, with everybody when we're developing these proposals that then go to the European Commission and to the EASA member states. But when we were looking into support programs, we realized there was a massively strong support from all the stakeholders, so from both sides, from employers and from trade unions, that this is actually a very good thing, and that it should also be integrated into the safety management system of the airline. And we should also make sure that we are somehow making sure that this is linked with the competent authority. Yeah. So we got our, so the trigger effect was the Germanwings accident in March 2015. We then had the French accident investigation report, EEA report, with very clear recommendation that as a result of this accident, there was a clear safety recommendation that we should look into peer support groups. And that is what we took, and we worked with that. Now, there was a big challenge when we worked on this particular issue of support programs for pilots. How can we actually create an environment that encourages and is supportive of voluntary self-reporting? It's a voluntary thing. You can't mandate something that is voluntary, can you? That was the question that we had. How can you actually include trust and respect, things that are very difficult to quantify, to measure? How can you include something like trust and respect into a legal text? Is that actually possible? I mean, in EASA, we're doing rulemaking. We're also doing safety promotion, but here we had a clear mandate to develop a regulation applicable, as you said, Johan, to the commercial air transport operator, to mandate trust and respect, very difficult. And to destigmatize mental health issues, also very difficult. And how should we then actually draft these rules? What should go in the regulation itself, and how much you need in terms of guidance material and acceptable means of compliance to supplement, to accompany those rules. That was a very, very big question mark for us when we started on this journey. And finally, of course, once we have the regulation, it was always clear for us that we need to support you, the stakeholders, when you implement something that is so new to many of you, or it's something that you have already done for many years, because many airline operators have actually already worked with support programs, but you have never codified it, or it has existed outside of your management system, for example, or it just happened spontaneously and naturally, and you never given it much thought. So how can you actually integrate it into your management system, into your operations? That was also a big question, and it was clear from us from the start that we will support the stakeholders. So our expectation when we were drafting this regulation is that it must be a multi-stakeholder approach. So we must make sure that all the parties are involved. We must make sure that whatever you set up as an airline, the support program, it must be linked to your SMS. But of course, the data that goes in it must be anonymized. So to protect the confidentiality of the system, that was very important for us, because otherwise, without confidentiality, you don't have trust. That's a given. And the people that are involved in setting this up, while it's very encouraging to have so many people who are willing to dedicate their time in doing this because they really believe in the importance of it, it's also important that some people who are helping to set this up have the proper expertise and training. That was also clear for us. So that's why we've made some AMC guidance material on aviation psychologists, for example. And of course, what is also important for us in EASA, that we fully understand there will be no one-size-fits-all solution, especially for the EBAA audience today. We fully understand that we have many small operators who will be completely overwhelmed with setting up such a system themselves. And it might also be counterproductive because in a very small operator, you immediately run into issues of trust and confidentiality. So outsourcing to a third-party service provider must be an option. Yeah, that for us was clear from the beginning. And the most important message that I would like to communicate to those of you who are in management positions and who are now struggling to set this up in your own organization, especially as we have these difficult times right now, it will be a step-by-step approach in implementation. So we fully understand, like SMS, you are not going to have a fully functioning SMS overnight. The same logic applies to support programs. You're not going to have a fully functioning support program overnight. This takes time and is probably much better if you decide to develop something from scratch, that you take your time, you do it step by step, rather than getting something off the shelf and then forcing this onto your organization. That is something that we learned pretty quickly. And of course, we understand what's important here is fora like these, but also the WebExes that we've organized, that we facilitate exchange of best practice, because the rule, as limiting as it is not going to provide you with all the answers. We have a lot of guidance material, but as I said, it's not going to provide you with all the answers. So this was a little bit about the background of why we have embarked on a regulation like this. As Johan says, it is applicable as of 14th of February 2021. Actually, the regulation number is 2018-1042, and it is applicable on the 14th of February 2021. We have delayed the applicability date because of COVID. This was a decision made by the member states and the European Commission, and we supported this, of course, because we understood that industry was really struggling to cope with any new implementation of new regulation at the time. And we are supporting you, we are supporting our stakeholders via webinars that we've organized. We've organized 4 dedicated online webinars. All the PowerPoint presentations are available on the EASA website. We have tackled in those webinars the really hot potatoes, the topics where we have received the most questions. And I think with that, I would like to leave it, Johan, and hand back the floor to you to have a good discussion later on with the audience.
Thank you so much, Julia, for that background and also pointing the audience towards the EASA webinars, which I've attended most of them, and I know that it's the 4th and final is in the pipeline in the next couple of weeks, if I don't remember. Anyway, if you're interested, go to the EASA website and events. Now, you touched on implementation, which is writing the regulation in the proper format was a challenge. It's also a challenge to implement, and to assist in the implementation, there was some years ago created a group called EPPSI, European Pilot Peer Support Initiative. And we have Dave Fielding from EPPSI that will give you a bit of background of what EPPSI is and how it can support this important support program when you implement it. Dave, please. and you need to unmute.
There we go.
Yes.
Disappeared off the bottom of the screen. Yeah, I can fly a 380 around the world, but I can't manipulate Zoom. It's a bit of a worry, really, isn't it? Right, so I do have a presentation available, just as a couple of slides, but I don't know where that is. Here we go. So yes, EPPSI, the background to it, it was actually a group of very far-sighted individuals who, right after the Germanwing crash, recognized what was in the pipeline, what was going to come, and that it needed a body that was an independent one to identify the good from the bad, basically. So how do I control this? There we go. So this body was set up basically as the doctors, the medics and psychologists. So that's ECA, the pilots, ESAM, the medical group, and the European Association of Aviation psychologists, plus the existing expertise that was available at the time. So that would the basics would be the big players there would be Stiftung Mayday, who've been going for about 25 years now, and absolutely have a wealth of expertise there, and other affiliates such as Mayday Italia, and ourselves in the UK with the Pilots Assistance Programme. So they were the founding organisations, and we were working at, it was interesting at that point that we were not working with EASA. This is in the very early days in 2016, when it was still at the RMT phase, RMT 0700, if I remember rightly. So we're actually operating independently. And it was the idea, as our chairman, Paul Reuter, would say, is that we really wanted to avoid the snake oil salesman. We saw that there was an opportunities here for all sorts of interpretation of the regulations. To try and draw together the various strands from what we had in Europe, and indeed looking out across the world to see what was best practice, so that we could then bring that together and act as a sort of a central body to offer in an independent, non-profit making, non-affiliated organization to say what the best practice was. And we did look far and wide, with a wealth of experience already within Europe, but also we made contacts around the world and drew upon everything. And it all led to this. If you haven't seen it already, I can thoroughly recommend it, and we'll put the link up at the end. It's the EPPSI guide. It's available on the website on design and implementation of peer support programs. That's actually out of date. We've just released the second edition, as a result of feedback from around the world on various points in the document to actually improve it. It's a small read, 34,000 words, but it gathers together best practice, basically. Now, I appreciate that it was very much aimed at the larger operators, or people who wanted to join a syndicate from a larger perspective. And I appreciate the audience we're speaking to today, that it is a different ball game. But what I would say to that is, please read it, because it will give you the background to understand how the EASA regulations actually can translate into practice. And then it's a question of working out how you adapt that to your own personal circumstances. Because one thing we are very clear about is that every country, every AOC holder within those nations will have different flavors, different cultural flavors, different organizational flavors, different relationships between workforce and management, etc. There is no one size fits all, which we make clear in this guide. But what we're saying, excuse me, is that these are the principles, and it's up to you. They're like Lego bricks. We'll look at those in a minute, actually, that the Lego bricks have to be there. The essential elements have to be there. How you fit them together is up to you according to your setup. So I'll quickly whiz through what we say that those Lego bricks are. The basic process is actually a pretty simple one, as from what we can gather. You need input to your program, and that input's going to come from one of three sources. It's either going to be pilots self-referring, which actually is the majority of traffic into these programs. It's either going to be friends or family raising concern. It's obviously a minority there, but it does happen. And it can be colleagues. Now, colleagues raising concerns is a very, very hot topic. That's intervention. That's when someone has got a problem and they're unwilling to admit it. What do you do about it? And we really haven't got time to go into that today. That is a whole day's worth of discussion and conferences on the subject of intervention. Suffice to say, there is guidance in the EPPSI guide, and it's something to put some thought into. If provided you do it in a structured, clear and transparent way, it is doable. And I would argue that it is necessary, because that's why we're all here in the first place. The input will lead to a process. That process must include peers, and that's a very important point. And particularly, I think it will come on your radars as to why you have to use peers, why you just can't outsource it to an EAP, etc. The answer is that EAPs have always been around. They're just not used. The historical, well, the actual data for usage of EAPs amongst pilots is very, very low. For a simple reason, I don't think they trust to open up onto the counsellor on the end of the phone whom they've never met, who doesn't understand the job, which is why the guidance from Julia and EASA was very clear. You have to use peers because they get it. They understand. So you train them up, and you train them in specific ways that they cannot give solutions. And actually trying to find pilots who don't automatically give solutions to problems is very tricky. We struggled to find 20 out of 4,000 in British Airways, but we managed it. They have specific skills that they're trained up. And one of those is that it's gathering what the information is and finding the scope of the problem. Is it just affecting yourself, or is it affecting members of the family or whoever? And finally, it's actually, with skills, helping the pilot themselves to come to the answers to their problems, because that is by far the most effective way of actually getting help to a pilot. That help will lead with one of three things, and the output of the process will be either the pilot's issues are resolved satisfactorily, just through that golden conversation with the peer, and actually data around the world indicates with remarkable consistency actually that around about 85% of all problems or all issues that pilots have that is sufficient to contact a program, they're solved just by talking with a peer. Quite remarkable actually, just by doing an effective trained sounding board of a fellow pilot, most problems get solved along that way. You get a percentage of problems that aren't, and you have to have signposting towards a very clear and obvious pathway to help. And finally, the one I referred to earlier, the output may well be that a pilot receives support, removed from the roster and supported via intervention, but that is for another day. The most critical point of all of those is this one, self-referral. And if there is one message that as you embark on this journey to try and implement these EASA regulations with peer support, it's one thing to remember. In this game, the horses scare very, very easily. And what I mean by that is that mental health and pilot mental health, actually of any professional whose existence and ability to do their job relies on an external agency to give them their ticket in the form of a medical or a license or even a reputation, is that the fear of losing that license or medical or reputation is very great and leads to behaviors which are not healthy, and the like, mainly concealment. In other words, if you give pilots the slightest opportunity not to open up about their problems, then they won't. They will just simply clam up and not say anything. So, and disappear. So it's a very difficult job, as Julia has alluded to actually persuade pilots to open up about their problems and seek help. And so what we argue in the EPPSI guide is that you have to corral those horses. You have to put the fence around them to calm them and actually say it's safe. You can actually open up. You're not going to lose your license, your livelihood, your relationship, your family, and everything. That support is there. But that fence consists of elements that all have to be there. I'll run very quickly through them. These are the Lego bricks I talked about. It has to, primarily, you have to have a safe zone. The area that you make contact with the program with must be confidential, and enormous steps must be taken. It's actually, the legislation itself is only in two parts, the core legislation, and 50% of it is dedicated to confidentiality. And that there's a reason for that, that it is without that confidentiality and trust, as Julia said, you have no program. So the efforts that you put into creating a confidential safe zone will reap benefits. Secondly, you have to have peers. I think that's what we've already talked about, that you can't have external people. You need people who understand, who get it, who operate in the same working environment is the wording of the regulation, because people are more likely to open up to someone who says, yep, I've been there, I understand. You need clinical oversight. None of us are qualified, very few pilots are qualified psychologists, psychiatrists, or doctors. In other words, we are highly trained amateurs. We need that oversight. We need the guidance and the viewpoint and the resource of a psychologist, and preferably an aviation psychologist, as much as that exists, a psychologist with a specialization in aviation. Aedrian is one, and CAP is a firm that there are firms available that have these people, but their support of this resource is absolutely vital. You also need an efficient contact mechanism. Simply putting a message on the back of the toilet door saying, if you've got problems, phone this number, doesn't cut it. It's not enough. The contact process has to be active, proactive, and readily accessible, in the words of the regulation. So we've got plenty of advice on those, and the new technology of websites and apps, etc., makes it ever easier to contact these programs with anonymity. You actually need someone to coordinate this. It can be a pilot, and there's certainly programs around the world where it is a pilot, the welfare directors in, say, America or Australia. I have worries that I think on a big program that's it's going to be too much for one person. For you guys, I think that's almost certainly going to be an outsourced function. Pathways to help you will need to keep an eye on, because presumably even the small operators must have some medical oversight of their pilot workforce and access to medical stuff. And so it's no use having a program that identifies a pilot needs some psychological help and then what? It not being clear how you get that help. So when you're designing the program, there needs to be a clearly identified way of getting the help that you need, whatever that help is. You need to have oversight of it and the monitoring group. How you set that one up with small and medium-sized airlines working in a syndicate, it's all perfectly possible. Stift and Mayday have demonstrated how to do that. You have monitoring groups that are either on the national program level or smaller levels as well, where all the stakeholders sit and look at, the words are anonymized and aggregated data to look for trends. This monitoring group is the link back into the SMS. It completes the loop of safety, and is very, very important to keep an eye on the program, and it needs senior people of all stakeholders in there. And that's the final point, is that you need the cooperation of every part of your workforce. Whether your workforce has unionization or not, it will have some form of pilot representation body. They must be included in this, because basically if they're not, it's a waste of money, because the pilots just won't trust it. Anything that is perceived as a management program is doomed to failure in this area, because the pilots simply won't trust it. So what the message there is, look at those elements. They're all there in the guide. If any of those sections of the fence are missing, the horse will just simply escape and go through it. You need all of those elements together to form an effective program. So that's my short presentation. Just the big picture summary of that one is that it's against the code for me as a union rep to actually be nice about any airline management or regulator. But actually EASA have done a very, very good job with these regulations. We've actually found in all the inquiries we've had at EPPSI that even the more outlying ones, or can we do this and can we do that? We've always found the answer in the regulations somewhere. They're comprehensive and couched in very careful and clever language. So they are a good set of regulations, and I commend them to you. Basically, the EASA have dictated the what, and the EPPSI guide is saying how you do it. And I recognise that there's be all sorts of questions about how we do that with small to medium-sized operators. No doubt you were looking at all of those blocks and thinking, what can I outsource here? We haven't got the resources to do that. The short answer is yes, you can. Pretty much everything there around those blocks can be outsourced out. And it needs some intelligence, and there's experience out there, and Aedrian will talk more about how that can be done. And the final point I'll leave you with will actually lead into something later in the discussion, that the integration with drugs and alcohol is a golden opportunity to weave the two together. It's no coincidence that these two regulations are coming out at the same time. We'll talk about it later, but don't forget that use of the impending random drug and alcohol testing can be used to promote, and the big word in here is education. And peer support programs offer now an avenue for pilots with problems to get help, and drugs and alcohol form part of that one. And they, without doubt, will benefit the whole industry, not least through a safety aspect, but also the well-being generally of the pilot workforce. And with that, I hand back to you, Johan.
Thank you so much, Dave. And as Dave mentioned, I will hand over to Aedrian, who is well known. Last time you appeared was on stage in Cologne in the 2018 version of Safety Summit, when the peer support program was just made public, and then we had the 2-year implementation period. And since then, you've been working a bit and more focusing on small operators that have its own set of challenges, just as Julia and Dave mentioned in their presentations. So over to you, Aedrian.
Great, thank you very much, Johan. I really appreciate that, and thank you for the introduction. Hello to everybody. It's nice to see you all. Obviously, it would be far better for us to be seeing each other in person. When I was last with you, I had the pleasure of visiting the Christmas market, and gosh, what a luxury that feels like now. And also, this is the first time that I talk to you as a fellow member of the EBAA, and so it's a great proud moment for me to be talking to my fellow members. So before we start this presentation, I think if we could just take a step back, and 2 things to comment with regards to what Dave was saying. First of all, not only the recommendations, but also here's my opportunity to be nice about the regulator. A huge congratulations to what they've achieved. EASA is the only sort of super regulator in the world who's mandated this provision. And as a result of that, even though the deadline date was shifted, thousands of pilots were supported and have been supported during this difficult time of COVID. Elsewhere in the world, peer support is seen as a nice to have and is very much optional. And consequently, the results often speak for themselves in pilot well-being and so on. And the other thing really to comment on is most of you will be sitting there thinking, how do we get our heads around this legislation and to be compliant and so on? But let's also remember what the intention of this legislation is about. It's about enabling a demographic, a group of people who are very much human. They are faced with the same pressures that everybody else do, and obviously operate in a safety critical environment, and are typically and characteristically sort of hard to reach in terms of encouraging them to reach out, as Dave was saying. And accessing peers is not only a good thing for their well-being, but also for those of you with owners and customers who may be asking you pokey questions. It's actually essential from a safety perspective and a well-being perspective, not only of the pilot, but obviously those that they carry. So, you know, obviously I have a vested interest in saying this, but it's certainly a regulation that I think is well before its time in terms of a mandate. So if I move on, and if I've got there we go. So just to say, we started, for those of you who I've not met, I recognize some names and so on, but essentially the Center of Aviation Psychology was founded by myself and my colleague, Professor Ball, and effectively really just to specialize in supporting AOCs implement this particular regulation around peer support. We found ourselves in a situation. We found ourselves in a situation where we were being asked more and more by large AOCs to help them implement and consider these legislations, which is indeed what we did, and that's where we got to know the likes of British Airways and many other operators. And in that time, sort of the reach that we've had has been sort of growing and growing, as you can see, in different countries and different languages and so on. And our intention at the beginning was very much at the large operators and helping them in one shape or the other. But what was interesting to us in doing so, a lot of the smaller operators came to us and saying, well, we don't have the economies of scale, you know, sort of what is there for us? And this is where we got to know business aviation and then the rotary wing side of things as well in a way that we'd not done before. And through that, we'd developed 2 programs, and latterly the 3rd program. First, the business aviation peer support program is obviously aimed at business aviators and rotary wing professionals, and really supporting and serving that particular group, recognizing that for many of you who'll probably be on the call, you'll be operating on very limited budgets, you'll have very little resource to implement this, and possibly feeling a bit overwhelmed with the scale of it if you've not implemented it yet. And our ambition was to provide that service to you, to support you through that and provide it as in a painless way as possible. The CAP PSP is very much similar, but that's aimed at the small charter airlines who may fall out of the remit of the EBAA, but nonetheless are looking for the same savings. Now, interestingly, the 9H PAN, I was on a webinar to them this morning in Malta. This is country specific, where the country is small enough to want something that captures everybody, the national airline plus all the AOCs, charter and business and rotary wing, and that's what we provide as well. And you can see a sample of our clients too there. Those clients range from 5, 2, 3 pilots to several hundred, and it's been a fascinating learning journey for us. In the interest of time, I won't go through each of these bullet points, you'll be pleased to know, but it really is just to highlight the key features of considering any peer support. The most important thing is obviously it's there for the pilots, and it needs to be easy to use. They need to have trust in it, as we've heard from Dave, and it needs to make sense and have all the necessary confidentiality parameters there. But the other main thing to emphasize, it's not just there for the heavy duty big issue of mental health and well-being. It's also there for the stresses of everyday life that can feel particularly burdensome, and particularly if you've got nowhere to turn, can be very much overwhelming and very much distracting. The key thing about any peer support program that you select for your AOC, however you provide it, whether it's internally or via third party or via network or whatever, is it needs to be professionally run. So not only does it need to be independent and the appropriate backup, but it needs all the infrastructure behind that. So if you do come across something that looks very cheap and is too good to be true, like most things, go around the vehicle and kick the wheels a bit and have a good look underneath the bonnet, because often what you'll find is something that's a bit of smoke and mirrors and mirage out there without the substance beneath it, the regulatory framework, the SOPs, and the data compliance and so on. Now, the big thing for most AOCs will be about the value. So what do we get from this? It's a good thing to be towards the duty of care. But in many ways, and this is the key aspect, peer support programs are really there to support pilots to sustain and maintain their careers for as long as possible. And also when they're not well, to support them through that period as well. And therefore reduce the training costs and everything that is associated with unplanned absences permanently, or just as long-term sickness and so on. So there is a very solid business case to make, particularly to owners, as hard as that may be. But I certainly encourage you to consider it from that perspective. There is a value argument there. Now, if you are going to choose a PSP provider as a third-party provider, it's important, as I say, to do your due diligence. And there are a couple of easy things to do. First of all, just check that they're registered going concern. Have they published recent accounts? are they a proper legitimate business? We've come across a number of providers who aren't and purport to be, and that's an obvious thing. Check if they're registered businesses. The next is see what sort of connection or what sort of mental health provision do they have. Is it just a loose associateship with the mental health professional? Are they directors of the company? Do they have formal contracts with the company? And then the next aspect is what sort of training do they do for their peers? How do they supervise them? How were their peers trained? What sort of professional indemnity insurance do their peers have? And then next, ask about the SOPs that they've got, particularly in the event of safety critical incidents. And then the other aspect to that is the boring but important stuff, such as GDPR. It's a topic that I spoke at the last EASA conference, and I amazingly feel quite passionate about it, having now studied it, so you don't have to. But GDPR is a fundamentally important aspect to any business, and yours in particular. So once you ask your potential provider all these questions, I think very quickly you'll sniff out as to the caliber of the service that they provide. And as I sort of close off, I mean, obviously there are other providers out there, but this is the service that we provide. By all means, have a look, bizavpsp.com, and you'll get a sense of what it is that we provide, with plenty of frequently asked questions to go alongside that. And I think at that point, I'm going to hand back over to Johan and give you an opportunity, Johan, to take any questions or to continue the program as per se. Over to you, Johan.
Thank you so much, Aedrian. As some of you have mentioned, there are some challenges.
Sorry.
Yeah. Related to business aviation, which because of size. And let's see if we can have the result of the first poll before we continue as promised. Yep, there we go. So actually, it's not too bad. It's about little bit more than half is well on their way to be up and running with the support programs in by February. And there is a reason why EASA has and the Commission has postponed the implementation dates. We've all been very busy with COVID, although maybe a peer support program can also be helpful in managing COVID. So one of the solutions that has been mentioned is pooling up resources together with other small operators, since the critical mass to do a proper peer support program might not be possible for a very small operator. So I'd just like to launch a quick poll on that, and then while you answer, also take one of the questions from the audience. And there was actually one from Paulo, really interesting one. How can we effectively and efficiently balance legal requirement with emotional disease? How can we be monitoring pilots' well-being? Well, is the purpose of this really to monitor well-being as we monitor other technical parameters, or is it more when you need help, you will have help available? Any volunteers to answer the question? Let's say Aedrian, or sorry, Dave, from an EPPSI point of view.
Measuring mental health is virtually impossible, because you will never be able to say that non-accident happened because the pilot was in good mental health. It's almost a leap of faith. It's certainly the right thing to do, but at the end of the day, we're here because of an accident that revolved around mental health that could have been prevented, possibly, if appropriate support programs had been in place. There were other factors that were at play with the German accident, for sure, But the fact remains, and I widen this out. I think the argument is comes into the alcohol arena. And this is actually how I came into the peer support stuff in the first place, was through 2003 was our annus horribilis for British Airways, with 3 BA pilots trigger positive breathalyzer tests in the space of 1 year, and there's also 1 Virgin pilot. And when I did the disciplinaries for them in my union role, and what was clear was that 2 out of those 3 pilots were had known problems, that they were just, oh yeah, everybody knows they've got a drinking problem, which means the reputational damage to the company because of that was enormous. And it affected all of our processes, our internal policies about drinking, and all sorts of, the mess was incredible. And that's how you measure pilot well-being. If you can prevent that, if you can prevent, yes, you can have a look at statistics on short-term sickness and long-term sickness, but I think that's a fool's errand, because those can be masked by so many other elements that you won't get a true picture on it. But it's the absence of the big ones. It's the absence of a pilot who has to delay a flight because they've have a positive breathalyzer test, or worse, the absence of the reputational damage of your company ending up in the local papers because they had a drunk pilot, for example. That's, I think, how you measure it. That's how you balance it. If you try and put metrics on it, I think you're doomed to failure. It's a question of stepping back and thinking, what is the right thing to do here? Because what the right thing to do here will probably be the most efficient and the most best value for money.
Thank you, Dave. And perhaps Julia has a little bit of input there, because as I understand the regulation, there's actually no requirement to put metrics like they've mentioned on pilots' well-being from a regulator's point of view.
Yeah, so if I may, just to recap, that the actual rule of the regulation on support program is super small. It actually only has 2 paragraphs, the rule itself, and then the acceptable means of compliance and guidance material that underpins this rule is much, much bigger. But the actual rule, so what we actually want the operators, what we require them to have, is a proactive and non-punitive support program that will enable, facilitate and ensure access. So the operator must enable, facilitate and ensure access to such a proactive and non-punitive support program. So that is what we have required, and this support program then will assist and support the pilots in recognizing, coping with and overcoming any problems that will negatively affect their ability to safely exercise their privilege and their license. Yeah, so we have made this very high level. So we are not requiring that the operator sets up the following types of matrix to evaluate the well-being of the personnel. What we require is that there is a system available that provides access in a proactive and non-punitive manner. So when I say proactive, it means that you can already call this system, call upon the system, if you are not yet falling over the cliff, or you're not yet seeing the bottom of the cliff. When you realize, well, there is something, I'm overwhelmed, and it's like a first emergency brake that you need to use. And that's what we want to have. We want to have something that is proactive. So things that would otherwise be easily put under the carpet, and especially in a profession like in aviation, where we are all highly professional. Especially pilots have been selected based on all sorts of tests and assessments. We are fully aware of that. But of course, in such an environment, it's also important that people also have access to an early warning system, to an early support system where they can easily talk to a peer or make use of that. So it is not our aim that the operator sets up a very immaculate and very detailed measuring system. The focus is on the personnel, the focus is on the pilot and the access that needs to be provided to the pilot to such a support program that will support them not only for alcohol problems, but for any problems that they struggle with in recognizing, in coping with, and in overcoming. Yeah, so it's quite wide. And while it's also good to focus on alcohol, because yes, indeed here, like for all other things as well, we have seen that support programs are highly effective and they cost very little compared to when you let it drag on. And as Dave has mentioned, you then can easily enter into a huge issue, not only with regards to safety, but also credibility. So that's our focus. Our focus is really to provide this access to this support program. I hope I was able to answer the question.
Yes, you were, Julia, and thank you for the very clear answer. And there's actually no requirement to provide metrics on pilots' well-being. So if we have the result from the poll, okay, so there's quite a bit of significant part of our members that have already joined in a multi-operator peer support program, which is probably the one solution for small operators in our business. And a little bit considerate of timing, there are some good questions, and in order not to completely overrun this session and give Jeroen the opportunity to discuss and present on alcohol testing, something that all the panelists on peer support has touched on, since peer support and alcohol testing and positive tests have also historically, some of the existing peer support programs originated as support programs for alcohol problems. I will now give the floor then to Jeroen to give you a bit of background and how the alcohol testing as part of the ramp checks will be in the future, and already in some states there is alcohol testing ongoing.
Thank you very much, Johan. Yeah, first my compliments to the previous speakers for their good speeches on this very interesting topic of the pilot support programs. I fully realize that those are the friends, let's say, of the pilots, and I'm here to defend the inspection program, which still should be checking pilots for their operations on the ground, and now also incorporating the alcohol tests soon. We decided to just create a few slides to summarize a bit the information, and I hope that still we have afterwards some time to answer some questions. First, a small table of content, what we're discussing, a few words on the roadmap, on the consultation we did with the stakeholders on the guidance which we have developed. Who can do the test actually during the inspections or on the ground, our risk-based model that we have put in place, as well as the alcohol test process, and what we do with the positive test results and the notifications of the positive tests. So the roadmap, the trigger was already mentioned, the German Wings accident, and although there alcohol did not play any role in it, the working group came to the conclusion that the testing of alcohol, as we call it in the past, the random testing of alcohol, should be part of the future rules, and that's where it was started. And in the end, in July 2018, the famous regulation was published, which introduced indeed the implementing rules for such alcohol testing during ramp inspections. In a few months later, in November, also the related AMC and GM was published. The only thing remaining was to further draft guidance for the inspectors on the process on how to do the alcohol tests. So this was done 1 year later and sent to the various stakeholders for a consultation. We got comments back. We have amended those documents, and actually they have been published meanwhile. The next milestone was August 2020, when the rules should have become applicable, but like it was said before, they had been postponed until February 2021, since everyone has different priorities at the moment for obvious reasons. The consultation, as I said, we sent it to several stakeholders and we gave them 2 months' time to look at it. In the end, it was sent to our so-called OPSTEP, the technical expert body where we have all the member state representatives in. And out of the 31, 9 responded with some comments. We sent it to the FSTech, which is the industry representative body. And there are 4 of them sent answers to us with some comments. We also involved the ramp inspection training organizations, the 5 who received an approval to train ramp inspectors, because there's also training elements in this guidance, and 1 of them responded to it. And also 4, to our surprise, responded without being invited, but nevertheless, we took those comments into account. So who can do the test? And this is a very interesting topic. Basically, the regulation says that the member state needs to choose who is going to do the test. Preferably, it will be done by the ramp inspectors. So the regulation says the ramp inspectors, I should say differently, the member states shall ensure that ramp inspectors will do the alcohol testing as part of their ramp inspections. And we also introduced, in that sense, the so-called standalone alcohol checks, which do not have any other inspection elements, purely an alcohol test. But the regulation also says is that by derogation of this requirement, they can also decide to use other officials, for instance, police or the aviation police, if available in that state. And in that case, the other officials need to follow the same principles, and the program should have the same objectives as being described in our ramp. And the results should also be uploaded to our database so that we can use it for our statistics. And any of those checks will be uploaded to the database as standalone checks. But it's also important to note here that these checks done by other officials are out of our remit, and they are done by the national enforcement agencies, and we have no means to control it. Therefore, we have no means to standardize and control and monitor and coordinate that program. So only in the case of the first part where ramp inspectors are doing it, we are in close coordination with the member states. But if they have decided to use other officials, we are out of the loop, basically. So our ramp 106 requires us to implement a risk-based model. It says that we should come up with a list for both union and third country operators for the prioritization of testing. And it should be based on a risk assessment performed by us. And it should take into account the robustness and effectiveness of the existing programs already. And furthermore, it says that whenever a state is selecting an operator for an alcohol testing, then the competent authority shall use the list which we have published. That's an easy requirement, but the implementation in practice is more difficult, because how are we expected to assess the existing testing programs? And therefore, we have decided that we are implementing a very basic model, basically, of the risk assessment, and we use the KISS methodology. I keep it simple and stupid in this case, because the testing process is new to us. We don't have any previous data on this. We know that internationally, some states publish their testing results, but not in our environment. And therefore we have said, okay, well, we'll start off with a risk model, which is purely checking if there is a testing program available. So it is basically a quantitative assessment, not a qualitative assessment. And this information will be collected from questionnaires, which will be sent to the third countries, where we just basically ask them, do you, at a state level, have a testing program in place? Or if you don't, are you aware of any operator testing programs? And we also ask them what the national legal requirements are on these testing programs. We also take into account any data which will be voluntarily transmitted to us by operators. So in case one of the ICAO contracting states is not responding to our questionnaire, but the individual operator will send us the information, we will still take that into account to determine the risk for that operator. So if a higher risk is identified, it means that the operator will end up at a so-called priority list. And prioritization in that sense means that more checks will be imposed on this operator and or that more crew will be sampled during an inspection. And obviously, normally I think the inspectors will try to test the entire flight crew. But if we are looking at the cabin crew, it might not always be possible to test the entire cabin crew on board of an A380. So therefore, most likely they will start sampling the cabin crew. But being on a priority list, it means that maybe they take more time to have a higher sampling of the crew on board of an aircraft. So operators can be excluded from the priority list if we know that there is a testing program at state level exists and if there's an alcohol testing program at operator level exists. I should say and or. One of those is already sufficient. And knowing that with the legislation which is applicable to the EASA operators and that there needs to be a state testing program as well as an operator program, we said we will exclude them automatically from the priority list because they will have testing programs. So by default, there will be no European operators on that priority list. We start collecting data during a period of 3 years based on this, and then we can see if there's a further need to fine-tune this very basic risk model. Maybe we can identify if there is a certain domain where there's a higher positive test rate or on a certain operator or operator state, for instance. And that will lead to further adjustments of the model. But the first 3 years, we don't have that data. Therefore, we base it purely on the existence of a testing program. So a very simple process, a pilot or a cabin crew member will be asked for initial tests, which is a breathalyzer test. It's a non-invasive test. If it's negative, it's directly the end of the test. But if it's a positive test, there will be a confirmation test, which will be at least 15 minutes later to address certain issues, like, for instance, the mouth alcohol issue. And if this confirmation test is negative, it's the end of the test process and there's no problem at all. But if this confirmation test is also positive, it means it becomes a confirmed positive test, and then certain processes will kick in, meaning that the piloting command and or the operator will be informed. The crew member would need to be removed from duty, and there might be a handover to the national enforcement bodies. Some states have this process in place. Others have informed us that they will not have it for the time being. So after the crew member is removed from duty, it's the end of their process. No further steps. But I think in many states, they will be handed over to police or prosecutors for possibly further criminal investigations. And on the longer term, besides the notifications to the crew member, also the competent authority will be informed, which is either the competent authority of the operator or the competent authority being the licensing authority if different. In case of positive test results, and I reiterate, it's a non-invasive test. The first test certainly needs to be a breathalyzer test, and they use it to convert the breath alcohol concentration to the so-called blood alcohol concentration. And it's considered a positive test if the blood alcohol concentration exceeds the 0.2 or the national statutory limit, whichever is the lower. And we know that in some states it can be lower. And we know that some states will have the zero tolerance policy, which is even 0 grams. And I remember during the rulemaking process, this was leading to large discussions how we could have basically 2 limits in Europe. But it's something that we could not circumvent because the national limits established in criminal law cannot be regulated by European law. That's something which is a national prerogative and which cannot be controlled by any of our legal framework here. So therefore it's worded like this. It is maximum 0.2 or lower if the national limit is lower than 0.2. And also good to know that a test refusal is to be considered as a positive test. This is part of our RAMP 106, where the alcohol testing is embedded. If the test is refused, it needs to be treated as a positive test, meaning that the crew member would need to be removed from duty, etc. The only good news I have is that the positive test results will be excluded from the so-called operator ratio calculations. We have done this for several reasons. For instance, it may be that the data from police checks will also be fed into our database. And if they have a high number of positive tests, just because they do a high number of alcohol tests, it might really start influencing the operator ratio. And this is something which we didn't want. So therefore, we have decided that any alcohol test will not be taken into account for the ratio calculations, but the positive tests will be analyzed on a case-to-case basis to identify a possible trend. And that is the limit to it. With regard to the notification of positive test, of course, the crew member itself will be informed, and then the crew member should be informed on the national provisions, on the national regulation with regard to alcohol testing, but also the GDPR, for instance, on the data protection rules. Of course, the test results for the initial and confirmation tests will be provided to the crew member, the time of date of the test, as well as the device number. And the national statutory limit, which was applicable in that state. The operator will also be informed by the SAFA database. So the finding will be in the database, but this will be de-identified to the extent that it says that a crew member was tested positively without providing further details. And the further detailed information like names, license number, and the values, etc., they will only be made available to the focal points in the competent authorities, and their process should further inform the operator with these details. So this is not up to the inspecting authority, it is your competent authority or the licensing authority who will receive the data and will further communicate it to the operator and or the crew member. Good. This was a short presentation just to cover some of the elements. So thank you for your attention so far, and I give the floor back to Johan to address any questions if there are.
Thank you, Jeroen. Just one question that came to my mind. Considering that business aviation, and this is maybe a more general question and not on ramp inspections and not specifically alcohol testing, is business aviation or small operators part of your operator ratio calculation, or do we still, as we did a couple of years ago, to my knowledge, still are not included in this ratio calculation on how many ramp checks around Europe you can be exposed to?
So the ratio calculation is basically for each operator. So after a 12-month period, all the inspections are collected together, and we apply a formula to the results, and out comes a ratio, which can be seen as an indicator. It's not a direct safety indicator, because you might have invalid findings or incorrect findings, so that might give an incorrect picture. But it's at least an indicator, and we use the ratios to segregate the potential unsafe operators from the clear safe operators, and further investigations need to reveal if there is really an issue with the operator or not. But that's calculated basically for every operator. And this number can be aggregated to different levels, for instance, to a state level, to see the performance for all the operators in a certain state or a certain region, or even on a global level. So in that sense, it doesn't matter if it concerns a commercial air transport operator or a business jet or even private. If there's enough data, a ratio will be calculated for that operator. Does that address your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. And then another thing that maybe some of our panelists from the peer support program, how do you see this alcohol testing? Can that be connected and used by the peer support program as an input, as Jeroen just explained? A positive result will only reveal, or the identity will only be given to the NAAs, or the licensing authority. And perhaps is there a missing link between alcohol testing program and the operator's peer support program? As mentioned in the previous discussion, many of the long-time support programs came from alcohol problems within the pilot corps, and were really successful of rehabilitating some of the pilots, as it was in my own airline a long time ago. So how do we get the connection and the input to a peer support program to give support to recover from an alcohol issue? Anyone wants to volunteer to answer that question? Perhaps Dave, who's been involved in this for a long time, or I see Julia.
Thank you.
Yeah, Dave.
It's a subject I feel very passionately on, as you might have gathered, because I've seen it ruin so many lives, and it's not gone away. We had a pilot nearly 3 years ago now, ended up doing jail time, very publicly hauled off a flight to Mauritius out of Gatwick. And what really got me was when he was plastered all over the Daily Mail, have been pictures of him taken away in handcuffs, was the pilots. He was a commuter and stayed in commuting digs near Heathrow Airport, and more than one pilot contacted us in the union and said, yeah, that guy, just to let you know, we know he's got a problem. We know about the bottles that are hidden in the garden and all the rest of that stuff. And I can't tell you the fury that, why didn't they give us that information? There's 3-6 months previously. We could have done something. That guy lost everything. He lost his liberty, his job, his livelihood, his relationship, and everything, because colleagues didn't speak out, which is why we've always been, as a union, we follow the traditional IFALPA role and route of opposing random testing. And over the years, we've seen, I've had a hand in shifting certainly BALPA's, I can't speak for other member associations, position on random testing. We're not quite there as actually accepting it yet, but we are now neutral and accept the fact that it could actually be beneficial, for the simple reason, and here's the link that you're talking about, is to go out as a part of an educational program to your workforce. And it doesn't matter whether it's a large airline or a small airline, we're all pilots and we all face the same issues and all have the same possibility of self-medicating in a harmful way. The message to all pilots from all sides of the company is the net is closing in, and it is far better that you seek help, you get help rather than you get caught. In the past, it was difficult to get help for people, for yourself, without feeling the only really one of the few avenues was the company, and people were too scared to go to the company. But now we have peer support programs. We have the avenue to get help in a caring and supportive way. And what's the option? What's the alternative? It's jail time. It's all the horrible things associated with that guy from Mauritius. So that's your link. And I've personally come to embrace the random testing concept as something that could be a very useful tool to bring traffic in, to widen the net, to bring traffic in to a peer support program. That's my point. And just a very quick question when you're there, Jeroen, can you clarify for us the difference, which I thought was there in the regulations, that the EASA ramp regulations are done for non-domestic. In other words, they'll do the ramp checks on incoming airlines, but domestically based airlines, you've given the responsibility for random checks to the operators. Is that correct?
Thank you, Dave. First of all, for answering the previous question, I totally agree that this could be an opportunity indeed to for the support program, and I don't believe that the testing will save the world in a sense that we will stop or make the world safer because we catch the positive cases, because ramp inspections are being done on 0.27% of all flights in Europe. Therefore, there is still a very large percentage, the vast majority, almost 100%, which is not being checked. So therefore, we will not save the world by our alcohol tests. But I have good hopes that at least the deterrent effect will have some help. First of all, for some, let's say, occasional cases, pilots will think again before drinking the evening before. But for the really cases of addiction, that maybe colleagues will be prompted earlier to help that pilot, knowing that they might be tested and start to address it. Coming back to your question, maybe I was not clear enough. It's not that for the domestic operators, it's only the operator programs. Also, the cover regulation in Article 4 says that the member states need to test their own operators. It's a bit unclear at this stage, and we have actually a legal interpretation request running to what extent the tests on the national operators need to follow exactly the provisions in our ramp, or it could be just based on it. But it's definitely said that the competent authorities need to run these tests on their own operators as well. And we try to avoid the word random because that might somehow contradict the risk-based approach what we have. But if random means that we do it without any suspicion of positive cases, yeah, then it's indeed random tests which need to be done on all operators, including your own operators.
Unannounced is possibly a better word than random.
That is definitely the case, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you almost answered one of the questions from the audience, that it still sounds like random alcohol testing will be a numbers exercise to meet minimum testing numbers, as opposed to a reasonable suspicion test used by many states for mandatory alcohol testing of non-commercial activity. So instead of random, another word could be used, or any further comments on that, Jeroen?
No, actually, we abandoned the random. It was in the first versions of the implementing rules and AMCs, but we took out that word as much as possible to underline the risk-based elements which we have. But it should not be understood that we only run the tests for the dual cause, and when there is a suspicion reported by customs or colleagues or passengers, In that sense, indeed, it will be somehow random, but risk-based. Not sure this makes it clear, but it is like this.
Thank you so much. And I just peeked at the watch, and time is really running. We have used up our overrun time. And I would like to thank you all panelists for participating today. With running over with this much time, you can see that it's both these topics are really of interest to our members. And on peer support, I would like to point you towards EASA's webinars and the EASA website, where the 3 previous webinars, which really dig into various topics of peer support, or support programs rather, using Julia's words, are available as recordings, and also there will be one in a couple of weeks. I don't have the exact date in front of me. And maybe, Julia, if you just give the date for the next one. I think you're hosting it. No. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Johan, it's the 30th of November.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a Monday in 1.5 weeks. So, to all of you, thank you so much for participating today and making this second day of the EBA Safety Summit virtual version a success. And over to Corina, I believe, for the closing remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, Johan, and thank you very much to our panelists. It was a very, very interesting conversation, and we are sorry that we didn't get to answer all of your questions, but as you can see on the screen, if we didn't get to your question, or if you have additional question, please write to us at safety@ebaa.org. We will do our best to answer either ourselves or to reach out to the experts and get back to you with an answer, or at least point you in the right direction. Now, as Johan was mentioning, we got to the end of our second day of the Safety Summit, and I would like to thank our sponsors for their support, and I would also like to mention once again that EBAA runs a safety newsletter. It's called Be Safe. Please write it to us at safety@ebaa.org or check the EBA website for more information. I thank you once again very, very much for being with us today. Talk to you tomorrow. We start again at 10 o'clock. You should have received the link to join us.